first of all, I'd like you to start by introducing yourself.
My name is Peter Jas.
Sorry, Malcolm, are you set to record now?
I'm ready and going.
Okay, right, sorry. Okay.
My name is Peter Jaskiewicz. I'm a professor of entrepreneurship and family business at Concordia University in Montreal, Canada. And most of my research deals with entrepreneurial processes and family business.
So, welcome, Peter. Can you just kind of give us a little bit of background about your motivation for this research? You know, what you were looking at and why, and how it kind of changed in the process of looking at particular areas of family business?
When I started my career, I started teaching a course on family business, and a part of that course was the topic of succession. And so I stumbled across quite a few statistics saying that family firms have a lot of trouble passing on their firms to the next generation. In fact, the survival rates are quite low, and so we got interested and wanted to find out how some family firms are able to pass on firms while so many others fail doing so. And we decided to look at one of the oldest industries in the world, or at least in Europe, which was the wine industry, and conduct a qualitative study. And when we started to conduct interviews and talk to these family business owners and managers and family members, we realized, wow, there's something else going on than this data, because when we talked to them about the history, about the processes, what they do, they started to talk a lot about entrepreneurship and how they can keep the business young and rejuvenate the business and keep it interesting for the next generation.
So I mean, it's a very interesting question. How did you take from all of this data, from the qualitative data, the interviews, how did you kind of gather that together to find some themes? What was the kind of process you did from, people can have conversations, how you bring those conversations into something that becomes a research paper is really interesting. How did you do that?
Okay, but before you answer, take your shirt and go like this. Yeah. Good.
So after we recorded the first wave of interviews, we had several hundred pages of transcripts, and we had quite open-ended questions. And some of the first questions that was, in fact, tell us something about your business, about your history, what you have been doing, where you're coming from. And a lot of these families then started to tell us these entrepreneurial narratives, and these narratives of resilience, of how they survived perilous times and what motivated them to move on, that they survived when Napoleon marched into Germany, they survived a drought in the Middle Ages, strong hail, political turmoils, wars. And at the same time, they told us about all the great inventions that their predecessors and ancestors introduced. And we just went, well, that's very interesting. And then when we talked to the next generation, because in most cases we talked to 2 generations, in some cases even to 3 generations, we could see that they were completely excited and motivated to tell the same stories to us, and that it motivated them to step into the feet of their predecessors and become entrepreneurial again. And that way we could see that the entrepreneurial theme, what we call the entrepreneurial legacy, was something that motivated the next generation not only to come back to the business, but continue in this innovative path and help the firm rejuvenate itself. When you think about our firms being on average 11 generations old, and that's a few hundred years, and the oldest one being more than 30 generations old, right? That's a very long time span with lots of things going on in between, and these firms manage to compete and outcompete many others that have disappeared around them over a long period of time.
So it's very interesting to talk about, resilience. The observations I have from not as thorough research is that there's a kind of sense of, let's say, urgency or opportunity recognition or need to do something that is in the founders, and that kind of dissipates as you go from generation to generation, and that there's a kind of more entitlement mentality comes in the next generation. So, you talk about the positive things. Did you find evidence of things that those firms don't do that make a difference as well?
Yes, you're completely right that there are...
Can you put
the question ahead? Obviously, we didn't only find firms that were entrepreneurial and kept being entrepreneurial across generations, but we also found what we call more traditional family firms that kind of maybe lost a bit the entrepreneurial path, and what maybe dovetails better with what we read a lot in other research. And these were firms that focused more on the family, on the particular family traditions, and just on keep doing what they have been doing for a while, but it wasn't necessarily entrepreneurial. And we could also see that these firms faced more trouble getting the next generation interested in the firm, and competing with the neighbors, with the many other wineries around them, because Germany has more than 30,000 wineries, and it's one of the most competitive markets for wines in the world, because it's a very open market. And we could definitely see that the entrepreneurial spirit of some firms gives them an edge that other firms lacked. So basically there are two groups of firms along a continuum. We had firms that were very entrepreneurial across generations, to others that, at least in the most recent generations, were significantly less entrepreneurial.
So one final question about that before I ask the last question, which is about implications, and that is the obligation component. So for example, I'm at the Lausanne School of Engineering, right? Pierre Lausanne, who started with Seymour Schulich, the big gold company, is creating a next generation. His son, Christian Lausanne, is very involved in setting up and supporting this because it's got his dad's name on the school, right? So, and you see that inside, Entrepreneur Ventures. So, did you notice things about the differences between that sense of obligation? Did that come across, that they had to keep the business going because it was started by their father or their grandfather, or, obviously usually male, but did you see that coming across, or was that not a differentiating factor?
I think it is very important to mention that there could be obligation in families to take over the family firm from predecessors. And it's definitely the case that this played a role in some of the transitions that we have seen across generations. But I think the difference that we saw here is that in some firms, in some cases you can force your children to do something, and in others they're excited to do it. And it might lead to a similar outcome, but in one case there's a completely different passion, motivation behind it. And we could see that in families that were functioning well, and where the kids were from the childhood on involved in the vineyards, and they identified with the product, and the family was around, and they later on went out and got really good education in some of the top schools around the world in areas that were very relevant to the family business, and experiences. We have many cases, successors having gained experience in several continents and top wineries. They came back and they had the right education, right, to recognize opportunities, they had the experience, they've seen other innovation in other places, and they had the motivation and identification based on their upbringing, and they were excited to come back and conduct changes. And in these families it was also the case that the parents didn't mind the kids changing the business, saying this doesn't work, we have to replace this technology doesn't work. And it might have been that grandfather introduced that, and it was great in the 1920s. However, now times have changed, and we know this and that, and we have a PhD in chemistry, we have an MBA in this and in that, and you could really see that change and innovation was part of their DNA, in this case, in the DNA of these firms, whereas in other firms it was not.
That's fantastic. You're saying so many things that have implications of how we teach entrepreneurship, and why entrepreneurs actually are so enthusiastic about education, because they kind of see how all these different perspectives build on success. So that's my final question. There's a number of implications. So first of all, if you're in a family business, if you're the in that generation, what advice would you give to entrepreneurs that are in family businesses looking at the next generation? What advice would you give them based on your research?
I think our research has a lot of different implications for entrepreneurs. So far everybody believed, it's so important of this entrepreneurial role model, and the founder is so important, and I agree. But the truth is that many of these firms will continue to exist for generations to go, and 5, 10, 15 generations down the road, people won't know the founder any longer. So the entrepreneurial legacy, what we believe are these narratives of great entrepreneurial behaviors of the past, and narratives of resilience, are something that can help transmit this entrepreneurial message and the entrepreneurial spirit to future generations. So that's something that I would encourage every entrepreneur and business owner to do, to share these stories of great entrepreneurial success, come home and share it with the kids. Get them involved in the business with family members. But also, do not hesitate to share what went wrong. It's also a learning opportunity. How you survived, how it made you stronger. If it doesn't kill you, it makes you stronger. And we've seen many instances of things where in the end, a catastrophe, something really bad that happened, wasn't considered a catastrophe, but really a survival contest. They were proud that they survived, while so many other firms closed down the shop around the corner. So that would be one of the things I definitely would recommend to entrepreneurs and business owners. The second one is, and that was maybe something that was more interesting for us to see, it's not something that you can do in a day or two. You say, well, now I want to hand over the firm to somebody else and want to stay entrepreneur and innovative, top of the game. We saw it's a process that basically takes a whole generation. And the entrepreneurial families, we saw that 2-year-olds were involved in the business and they were excited about it, picking grapes. And 15 years later, they were telling us that they remember their 3rd birthday and how excited they were to cut grapes in the vineyards when it was 0 degrees outside and the snow started falling. So I believe it's a long-term process, and there are different pieces of the puzzle that all have to fall together into the same picture. And that's not something easy to accomplish. It starts with getting the kids involved early on in the business to be motivated and to identify with it. Later on, pushing them gently to get the right education and ensuring that they carry on this motivation and identification to get the right work experiences abroad at other places where they can learn and broaden their horizon. And then, and that might be for many entrepreneurs the most difficult, not only get them back into the business and they're excited, but also let them change things that you have introduced yourself and realize that the next generation might have new ideas, sometimes really good ideas, that they're worth to be implemented. And based on that, if all of that works out, to also ensure that then the new family that will be started by the next generation, that includes the partners or the partner, that this person also gets properly integrated in the family, so to avoid any friction on that side and to ensure that any issues of inheritance and with your siblings, that they do not become an issue, so the business can flourish and continue being entrepreneurial.
So final question directly related to that. Are there any things that you advise people don't do, things that, inevitably maybe alienate the next generation or stop things from happening, things that they should avoid, or things that you kind of saw as like red flags that you think this is going to cause an issue?
So there are definitely red flags and things that I recommend business owners and entrepreneurs in particular don't do, or at least very careful about. And I would like to mention 3 things. One of them is think carefully about how you want to hand over the business to the next generation. We have seen large families where business owners split the business in a lot of small pieces. And I think in one case, a very entrepreneurial family member took it over and was paying back for 20.5 years the debt that he incurred to pay out siblings. And he said, I had so many ideas. Now I'm close to the age of 60 and I start being entrepreneurial. I have 25 years to catch up with my competitors. Thought that was not a good sign. Another good example is to do not underestimate the next generation and the possible partner or the in-laws and their influence. 50% of the next generation might be in-laws. They're joining the family and they have to be part of it. They can add tremendous power and momentum to your entrepreneurial company. However, they can also wreck it, right, and put things on edge. So I think these are 2 critical things that some entrepreneurs might not think about, but that might be crucial for the future viability and innovativeness of the firms.
So wonderful. That's great. Any last thoughts? Any final thoughts about generation to generation issues in family business?
A topic that we are another thought that came actually when we were almost done with the paper was that we realized very often the business only passed on to 1 or max 2 kids or family members. However, there are many cases other family members, and we realize that what we describe as entrepreneurial legacy, that to some extent motivates and drives entrepreneurial behavior in the next generation, doesn't only have to do it in the family firm. And we are now venturing out to look at what other family members do, and we are conducting interviews and talking to these families again. And we are seeing that those who do not make it into the focal business, that's not everything. Some of these families have multiple businesses, they're starting new ventures. And we can see that the entrepreneurial legacy in this spirit also spreads out beyond the family firm. And I believe that's also something great to see, that it's not only about one entrepreneurial next generation member, but it's about entrepreneurial families more generally.
That's wonderful. So thank you very much. I think that was great. I think it was very succinct, and it ended up being about like 10 minutes long. So I think it was great. I'm laughing because two things. First of all, my grandfather was one of 12 brothers in a family business, and it was a mail-order company in England, and at one point 7 of the brothers sold the business and didn't tell the other 5. So it's kind of funny. But the other thing is in Canada, the family business in the UK, the people that own, I forgot their name, but the ones that own Canadian Tire, Irvings, the Rogers family. There's a lot of interesting family dynamics that they would have benefited from your research in terms of dealing with some of the big issues that are big challenges for them.
I just talked to the Maclean's magazine, and they just have an article about the Eaton family and compared it to Downton Abbey, and they mentioned me. We talked for a long time with them about it, about the family dynamics. So there are definitely large parallels, and I believe the important parallel is here too, that in Canada you have such an entrepreneurial spirit and a lot of great founders, but there is so little experience in handing it over to the next generation and keeping it entrepreneurial, because what the family business literature has always talked about is handing it over to the next generation, but that's not it, because they very often falter and it doesn't work out. It is ensuring that the next generation is entrepreneurial, can rebuild it, develop it further, what matters. It's not to just hand it over to somebody. So I believe Canadian firms have great potential, and there is a lot of entrepreneurial power that is here in spirit, but they still need to learn, or they could hopefully learn a bit on how to ensure that the next generation will continue this entrepreneurial spirit, so it is not only limited to the founder's generation.
Wonderful. Well, Peter, thank you very much for your time.
Okay, I have one request. I had to change the f-stop at one point, so I wanted to do the intro just to make sure that it will match in terms of exposure.
Sure. So if you just repeat, who you are, where you are, that would be fine. No problem.
Hi, my name is Peter Jaskiewicz. I'm a professor of entrepreneurship and family business at Concordia University in Montreal, Canada, and I work here in the management department.
Okay,
Malcolm, thank you very much.
you're welcome.
If you want to, I'm open to the best ways to transmit all these files, so just let me know. We can use